The buzzing sound that followed would haunt me for the rest of my life. I'm Amber Williams, and at 32 I thought I had finally escaped the suffocating grip of my mother's expectations. As a marketing director for a tech company in Atlanta, I'd built a life 2 hours away from my hometown of Magnolia Springs, Georgia, far enough to breathe close enough to maintain the facade of family harmony that meant everything to my parents. That night was supposed to be the eve of my wedding day, the culmination of 2 years of planning that had turned into a battleground between my vision of an intimate celebration and my mother's dream of a grand Southern spectacle that would cement our family's status as the crown jewel of our gated community. The evening air was thick with Georgia humidity as I sat in my childhood bedroom surrounded by pale pink wallpaper and antique furniture that had remained unchanged since I was 16. My parents, Robert and Eleanor Williams, had insisted I spend my final night as a single woman in the house where I grew up, a tradition they claimed that would bring good luck to the marriage. Robert served as chairman of the Magnolia Hills Homeowners Association and was a deacon at First Baptist Church, while Eleanor led the Ladies' Auxiliary and hosted the most coveted dinner parties in our zip code. To the outside world, we were the picture-perfect American family, successful, devout, and unshakably united. The truth was far more complicated. "Sweetheart, you look absolutely exhausted," my mother said as she glided into my room carrying a delicate china teacup on a silver tray. Eleanor Williams never simply walked anywhere. She glided, floated, or swept as if perpetually auditioning for the role of Southern matriarch in some grand production. Her blonde hair was perfectly coiffed despite the late hour, and her silk nightgown probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "I brought you some chamomile tea with a little something extra to help calm those pre-wedding jitters." I should have been suspicious. In 32 years, my mother had never once brought me tea for any reason, let alone to soothe my nerves. But the stress of the past months had worn me down the constant battles over guest lists, flower arrangements, and wedding traditions I didn't want but couldn't seem to escape. The tea smelled like home, like the antique rose garden my grandmother had planted behind the house, and I was desperate for anything that might quiet the anxiety churning in my stomach. "Thank you, Mama," I said, accepting the cup with both hands. The liquid was warm and sweet, with an underlying bitter note that I attributed to the chamomile. "I really am nervous about tomorrow." "Oh, honey, every bride feels this way," she said, settling onto the edge of my bed with the practiced grace of someone who had perfected the art of appearing nurturing while maintaining emotional distance. "Your sister Jessica felt the exact same way before her engagement party last month. Speaking of which, where is that girl? She was supposed to come say goodnight." As if summoned by her name, Jessica burst through the bedroom door with the dramatic flair that had defined her personality since childhood. At 28, my younger sister had inherited our mother's delicate features and our father's commanding presence, creating a combination that had opened doors and melted hearts throughout her life. While I had always been the responsible one, good grades, steady job, sensible choices, Jessica was the golden child who could do no wrong even when she did everything wrong. "Sorry I'm late," she announced, her cheeks flushed and her eyes unnaturally bright. "I was on the phone with Brad trying to convince him to propose already. I mean, Amber's getting married tomorrow, and I've been with Brad for 6 months longer than she's been with Nathan." I felt the familiar sting of comparison that had poisoned our relationship since childhood, but the tea was already making me drowsy, dulling the sharp edges of my irritation. My eyelids grew heavy, and the room seemed to tilt slightly as if I were viewing everything through water. "Jessica, don't be ridiculous," our mother said, but her tone lacked conviction. "Everyone has their own timeline." "Do they, though?" Jessica's voice took on a sharp edge that cut through my growing haze. "Because I'm tired of being overshadowed. I'm tired of Amber getting everything first just because she's older. I'm tired of being the afterthought." The teacup slipped from my fingers and shattered against the hardwood floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet room. I tried to stand to clean up the mess, but my legs wouldn't support me. The room spun faster now, and I had to grip the bedpost to keep from falling. "What did you put in that tea?" I managed to whisper, but the words came out slurred and distant. Jessica stepped closer, her face transforming into something I'd never seen before, cold, calculating, and utterly without mercy. "Cut her hair off," she said, her voice rising to just below a scream. "Or you'll lose me forever. I swear to God, Mama, if you don't do this one thing for me, I will walk out of this house tonight, and you will never see me again." Through the sedative fog, I watched my mother's face crumble as if Jessica had physically struck her. Eleanor Williams, who prided herself on maintaining control in every situation, began to cry, not the delicate tears of a Southern lady, but ugly, desperate sobs that shook her entire body. "Please don't make me choose," she whispered, but we all knew she already had. The sound of clippers cutting through my hair told me I'd lost much more than just my appearance. Consciousness returned slowly, like swimming up from the bottom of a murky pond. My mouth tasted like cotton and copper, and there was a strange coolness across my scalp that I couldn't immediately place. The morning light filtering through my childhood bedroom curtains seemed harsher than usual, and when I tried to sit up, the world tilted dangerously to one side. The sedative still clung to my system like cobwebs, making every movement feel sluggish and disconnected. It wasn't until I swung my legs over the edge of the bed that I noticed the hair-thick, dark strands scattered across the hardwood floor, like fallen leaves catching the sunlight in a way that made my stomach lurch. My hand instinctively went to my head, expecting to feel the familiar weight of the shoulder-length waves I'd been growing out for 2 years, specifically for this day. Instead, my palm met bare skin. The walk to my bathroom mirror felt like crossing a desert. Each step brought a growing sense of dread that crystallized into horror the moment I flicked on the overhead light. The woman staring back at me was unrecognizable. Where my hair had been, there were only uneven patches of stubble and angry red welts, where the clippers had been pressed too hard against my scalp. Jessica hadn't just cut my hair, she had scalped me with the precision of someone who wanted to inflict maximum damage. I raised trembling fingers to trace the geography of my destruction. The skin was tender and raw in places, with tiny cuts that had scabbed over during the night. Some areas were completely bald, while others had tufts of hair no longer than a 1/4 inch, creating a landscape of humiliation that no amount of makeup or strategic lighting could disguise. The sensation of touching my own scalp was alien and violating, as if I were exploring someone else's body. My fingertips, usually soft from expensive hand cream, felt rough and foreign against the unfamiliar texture of exposed skin. The bathroom door creaked open behind me, and I saw my mother's reflection join mine in the mirror. Eleanor Williams looked like she had aged a decade overnight. Her usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, her silk nightgown wrinkled, and her carefully maintained composure had cracked like old paint. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We simply stared at each other's reflections, 2 women standing in the wreckage of a relationship that could never be repaired. "Amber, honey," she began, her voice carefully modulated in that tone she used when trying to manage a crisis at one of her charity events. "You're still beautiful in your own way. Hair grows back, and there are lovely wigs we can find for today. Nobody has to know what really happened." The casual dismissal of my violation hit me like a physical blow. Before I could respond, my father's voice drifted in from the hallway, cold and matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather. "At least today you won't overshadow her," Robert Williams said as he appeared in the doorway, his arms crossed over his chest. He was already dressed in his wedding day attire, his silver hair perfectly styled, and his expression as emotionally vacant as ever. "Jessica deserves her moment to shine, and frankly, you've always been a bit too dramatic about being the center of attention." His words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples of understanding that spread outward until they reached the deepest corners of my memory. This wasn't the first time. It had never been the first time. I remembered my high school graduation when Jessica had thrown a tantrum about my valedictorian speech, stealing her thunder, and how my parents had suggested I keep my remarks brief so she could give the closing prayer instead. I remembered my college acceptance to Emory News that was buried because Jessica had gotten her driver's license the same week and needed to celebrate. I remembered birthdays where my achievements were minimized, and Christmas mornings where her gifts were always bigger, always better, always accompanied by explanations about how she was going through a difficult phase and needed extra attention. The pattern stretched back decades, a continuous thread of sacrificing my happiness for the sake of preserving Jessica's fragile ego and my parents' image as the family who had successfully raised 2 accomplished daughters. Except they hadn't raised 2 accomplished daughters. They had raised 1 golden child and 1 scapegoat, 1 princess and 1 servant whose only purpose was to make the princess look better by comparison. I gripped the marble edge of the bathroom sink until my knuckles turned white, using the physical anchor to keep myself steady as the full weight of my situation crashed over me. This was my wedding day, the day I had planned for 2 years, spent thousands of dollars on, and invited 200 people to witness. The day that was supposed to mark the beginning of my new life as Nathan's wife and my final escape from this toxic family dynamic. Instead, I looked like a cancer patient or a mental health crisis, and my own parents were standing there acting like I was being unreasonable for being upset about it. But as I stared at my reflection, something else began to emerge alongside the shock and hurt. It started as a small flame in my chest, no bigger than a candle's flicker, but it grew with each dismissive word from my parents and each memory of past betrayals. This wasn't just about hair. This was about 32 years of being told that my feelings didn't matter, that my needs were secondary, that my role in this family was to be invisible so that Jessica could be luminous. The flame became a fire, and the fire became something harder and more dangerous than rage. It became resolve. I placed my hand on my scalp and swore tomorrow they would be the ones trembling. Standing in that bathroom staring at my destroyed reflection, the memories came flooding back with crystalline clarity. This pattern of sacrifice and favoritism hadn't started last night. It had been the defining characteristic of my entire life, woven so seamlessly into our family dynamic that I had almost convinced myself it was normal. Almost. I was 14 when I first noticed how differently my parents treated us. At Magnolia Springs High School's annual spring formal, Jessica was only 10 then, but she was already the apple of everyone's eye with her cascade of golden curls and her ability to charm adults with practiced Southern Belle mannerisms that seemed to come as naturally as breathing. The night of my freshman formal, I had saved money from babysitting to buy a modest blue dress from the outlet mall, and I thought I looked beautiful. I felt confident walking into the decorated gymnasium with my date Tommy Peterson, the shy boy from my chemistry class who had stammered through asking me to dance for 3 weeks before finally working up the courage. But when I arrived home that night, glowing with the memory of slow dances and teenage romance, my mother barely looked up from the couch where she was helping Jessica practice her posture for some future cotillion that was still 4 years away. "How was it, dear?" Eleanor asked absently, her attention focused entirely on adjusting Jessica's shoulders. "Did you remember to keep your voice down? You know how you get when you're excited, a little too animated for a proper Southern lady." The criticism stung, but what happened the following week stung worse. When the formal photos were distributed at school, I proudly brought home the picture of Tommy and me, thinking my parents might want to display it alongside the other family photographs that lined our hallway. Instead, my mother glanced at it briefly and said, "Oh, honey, you look so serious." Jessica would have smiled bigger. She has such a natural camera presence. Maybe next time you could take some lessons from your sister about how to be more charming in social situations. That same year, Jessica started attending the junior cotillion classes at the country club, where she quickly became the star pupil. Every Thursday evening, my parents would dress her in tiny white gloves and a pink dress, driving her to the club while I stayed home to finish homework. When they returned, the conversation at dinner would revolve entirely around Jessica's progress, how the instructor had praised her natural grace, how the other parents had commented on her poise. I learned to eat quickly and excuse myself before the glowing reports began retreating to my room, where I could focus on my studies without the constant reminder that my academic achievements were apparently less noteworthy than my 10-year-old sister's ability to curtsy properly. The financial disparities became impossible to ignore during our high school years. When Jessica turned 16, our parents surprised her with a brand new pearl-white BMW complete with a giant red bow tied to the antenna. They presented it to her on a random Tuesday in March, claiming it was an early birthday present because they had found such a good deal and wanted to make sure she had reliable transportation for all her social activities. The entire neighborhood came out to admire the car, and Eleanor spent the afternoon taking photos of Jessica posing beside it, uploading them to every social media platform she could access. Meanwhile, I had been working 25 hours a week at Grounds for Happiness, the local coffee shop downtown, saving every penny for college application fees, and hoping to build enough of a nest egg to supplement whatever financial aid I might receive. When I asked my parents about getting a car or even borrowing money for a used one, my father handed me a bus schedule and told me that public transportation would teach me valuable life skills about time management and personal responsibility. He said it with the tone of someone bestowing wisdom, as if making me wait 40 minutes for a bus in Georgia humidity was some kind of character-building exercise that would ultimately benefit my moral development. The worst betrayal came during my senior year when I received notification that I had been awarded the Peachtree Scholar Award, a full academic scholarship to the University of Georgia that was given to only 12 students statewide. I was beyond thrilled. This scholarship would cover not just tuition, but room board and books, essentially guaranteeing my freedom and future without burdening my family financially. I rushed home with the letter practically floating through the front door, ready to share the best news of my life with the people who were supposed to love and support me most. I found my mother in the kitchen uploading photos to the Magnolia Hills Neighborhood Facebook group, but instead of celebrating my scholarship, she was posting a series of professional photographs of Jessica in her junior prom dress, a stunning emerald gown that had cost more than I made in 3 months at the coffee shop. The captions gushed about Jessica's natural beauty and her bright future, mentioning how proud the family was to have such a shining star representing our community values. I stood there holding my scholarship letter, watching my mother craft post after post about Jessica's dress, her hair, her potential modeling career, her perfect complexion. When I finally interrupted to share my news, Eleanor glanced at the letter briefly and said, "Oh, that's nice, sweetheart. Very practical. Now, do you think I should mention that Jessica's dress was featured in the boutique's window display, or would that sound too much like bragging?" That night I searched the neighborhood Facebook group for any mention of my scholarship. There was nothing, not a single word about the academic achievement that would change the trajectory of my entire life. But there were 17 photos of Jessica in that emerald dress, each one garnering dozens of likes and comments about how lucky our family was to have such a beautiful daughter. There was something from that year I'd never forgiven, and now it was coming back sharper than ever. The memories of those years crystallized into a painful understanding of exactly why my parents had been willing to drug and humiliate me on the eve of my wedding. For the Williams family reputation wasn't just important, it was everything. It was the currency that bought them respect at the country club influence in the church and authority in our gated community. And they had spent decades building that reputation on the foundation of what everyone believed was a picture-perfect family. My father's position as chairman of the Magnolia Hills Homeowners Association wasn't just a volunteer role, it was his throne. Every third Thursday of the month, our formal dining room transformed into a command center, where Robert Williams held court over property values, landscaping violations, and the sacred covenants that kept our neighborhood pristine. I had watched him orchestrate these meetings since childhood, observing how he wielded his authority with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony. He would stand at the head of our mahogany table, gesturing toward printed reports and architectural plans, while the other board members hung on his every word. During these gatherings, my mother would glide between the kitchen and dining room, serving her famous praline cake and sweet tea in crystal glasses that had been in her family for 4 generations. She never spoke during the official proceedings, but her presence was essential to the performance. Eleanor Williams was the living embodiment of Southern hospitality, the gracious hostess whose very existence proved that traditional values and family stability still thrived in our rapidly changing world. The other wives would compliment her on everything from her flower arrangements to her daughter's accomplishments, and she would deflect with practiced modesty while ensuring that every positive detail about our family was subtly woven into the conversation. The church committee meetings followed a similar pattern, though with an added layer of moral authority that made my parents practically untouchable in our community. First Baptist Church of Magnolia Springs wasn't just where we worshiped. It was where social hierarchies were established and maintained through a complex web of committee positions, volunteer roles, and financial contributions. My father had served as a deacon for 15 years, while my mother led the Ladies' Auxiliary and organized the annual charity auction that raised funds for the children's ministry. Together, they represented everything the congregation aspired to be successful, devoted and blessed with a family that reflected God's favor. I had lost count of how many times I had heard my parents referenced as examples during sermons or Sunday school lessons. Pastor Wilson would speak about the importance of raising children with strong Christian values, and inevitably someone would mention how fortunate the church was to have families like the Williams who had produced 2 daughters destined for bright futures. The irony was suffocating. Our family was held up as a model of Christian love and support, when the reality behind closed doors was manipulation, favoritism, and emotional abuse disguised as family loyalty. The wedding itself had been planned as the ultimate performance, a grand finale to decades of careful image management. When Nathan and I announced our engagement 18 months ago, my mother immediately began treating the event like a political campaign, with guest lists that read like a who's who of Magnolia Springs society. The invitation list included not just family and friends, but every influential person in our community, the mayor and his wife, the bank president, the country club board of directors, and naturally Pastor Wilson and his entire family. Eleanor had explained that a wedding was an opportunity to celebrate our blessings while demonstrating our family's continued prominence in the social fabric of our town. She had chosen Magnolia Hills Country Club as the venue specifically because it was the most prestigious location in our area, the kind of place where exclusivity was measured not just by membership fees, but by generational legacy. The ballroom where my reception would take place had hosted the wedding celebrations of senators' daughters and Fortune 500 executives' children. Having our family celebration in that sacred space would cement our status among the community elite, while providing the perfect backdrop for the hundreds of photographs that would eventually grace our Christmas cards and social media accounts for years to come. But now, standing in my childhood bathroom with my scalp bearing the evidence of my family's true nature, I understood that this wedding had never been about celebrating my happiness or honoring my relationship with Nathan. It was supposed to be the crowning achievement of the Williams family brand, a spectacular demonstration of our ability to raise successful, beautiful daughters who married well and reflected positively on their upbringing. Jessica's jealousy and my parents' willingness to accommodate it had revealed the ugly truth beneath decades of carefully maintained facades. As I watched my parents hover in the bathroom doorway, I noticed something that might have escaped me in the immediate shock of discovery. Neither of them could look directly at my head. My father kept his eyes fixed on a point just over my left shoulder, while my mother stared intently at her own reflection in the mirror, as if seeing my destruction might somehow contaminate her own appearance. They were already calculating the damage to their reputation, already crafting explanations and contingency plans to minimize the social fallout from what they had done. The realization hit me like lightning. They weren't worried about my pain or my humiliation. They were terrified that their carefully constructed image might crumble when 200 of their closest friends and most important social contacts saw what they had allowed to happen to their elder daughter. The very stage they had designed to showcase their family's perfection would instead become the platform for their complete destruction. If they worshipped image, I would destroy them on that very stage under the blinding lights of their own making. The sound of footsteps on the hardwood stairs interrupted the tense silence that had settled over my bathroom like a burial shroud. My parents immediately straightened their faces, transforming into masks of casual normality with the practiced ease of decades of social performance. But I recognized those particular footsteps measured deliberate and completely unintimidated by the Williams family's carefully orchestrated drama. Aunt Martha had arrived. Martha Williams Whitfield was my father's older sister, a woman who had earned her independence through 40 years of teaching high school English and had never felt the need to apologize for speaking uncomfortable truths. At 68, she moved through the world with the quiet confidence of someone who had witnessed enough family secrets to be shocked by very little. Unlike my parents, who measured their worth through community approval and social standing, Martha had built her life around books, students, and a small circle of genuine friendships that had sustained her through decades of watching the Williams family dysfunction from the periphery. "Well, well," she said as she appeared in the bathroom doorway, her silver hair pulled back in its characteristic neat bun, and her blue eyes taking in the scene with the analytical precision of someone assessing a particularly complex piece of literature. "I see we're having quite the morning drama." My mother immediately launched into damage control mode, her voice taking on that artificially bright tone she used when trying to convince people that catastrophes were actually blessings in disguise. "Martha, thank goodness you're here early. Amber had a little accident with some scissors last night. You know how nervous brides can get, and we're just figuring out the best way to style what's left for the ceremony." The lie was so blatant, so insulting to everyone's intelligence that I felt a fresh wave of rage wash over me. But Martha simply raised one silver eyebrow and stepped fully into the bathroom, her presence immediately shifting the balance of power in the room. She had a way of occupying space that made everyone else feel smaller and less significant, not through intimidation, but through the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades teaching teenagers and had therefore developed an immunity to manipulation and deception. "Robert, Eleanor," she said, her voice carrying the same tone she had probably used with countless students caught cheating on examinations. "I think Amber and I need a few minutes alone. Perhaps you could go downstairs and start preparing breakfast for your guests." It wasn't a suggestion, and everyone in the room understood that. My parents exchanged a quick glance, the kind of wordless communication that long-married couples develop, before reluctantly retreating from the bathroom. I could hear their whispered conversation beginning before they even reached the stairs, no doubt crafting their next strategy for containing the damage to their reputation. Martha waited until their footsteps faded before closing the bathroom door with a soft click. Then she reached into the large canvas bag she always carried and pulled out a collection of silk scarves in various shades of blue and gray, their fabric so soft and fine that they seemed to catch and hold the morning light. Without saying a word, she approached me and began gently draping one of the scarves around my head, her movements tender and careful in a way that made my throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "I've known about this for a long time," she said quietly, her fingers working with practiced skill to arrange the scarf in a way that covered my scalp while still looking elegant and intentional. Not the specific details of last night, but the pattern, the favoritism, the way they've always been willing to sacrifice your happiness to preserve Jessica's ego and their own social standing. Her words broke something loose inside me, and I found myself leaning into her touch like a child seeking comfort from the only adult who had ever offered it without conditions or expectations. Martha had always been the family outlier, the Williams who had chosen books over babies, career over marriage, and truth over social acceptability. During my childhood, she had been the one who remembered my academic achievements and celebrated my small victories with the kind of genuine enthusiasm my parents reserved exclusively for Jessica's social triumphs. "The thing is, sweetheart," Martha continued now, securing the scarf with a small pin shaped like a silver leaf, "technology has changed the game. These days, everything is recorded. Your parents installed that new doorbell camera system just last month. You know, the kind that's always recording, always watching. Technology is like a silent witness, now capturing truths that people think they can hide." The implications of her words hit me immediately. If the doorbell camera had been recording last night, it would have captured Jessica's ultimatum, my parents' conversation, maybe even the sound of the clipper's evidence, real undeniable proof of what had been done to me and why. For the first time since waking up, I felt something other than despair and rage. I felt the stirring of possibility. Martha seemed to read my thoughts because she smiled with the satisfied expression of a teacher watching a student reach the correct conclusion. "Now I happen to know that young man who handles the audio-visual equipment at the country club, Tyler Jang. Graduated from my AP English class 3 years ago. Bright boy, very good with technology, and absolutely devoted to the idea that truth should prevail over convenience. I think he might be very interested in helping you prepare a little private performance for this afternoon." As she spoke, Martha's hand moved to stroke my scalp through the soft fabric of the scarf, her touch carrying all the maternal comfort that had been missing from my actual mother's interactions. It was a gesture so simple and yet so profound that it made me realize how starved I had been for genuine affection, for someone to touch me with kindness rather than manipulation or control. "You're not alone in this, Amber," she said, her voice carrying the weight of decades of wisdom and the promise of unwavering support. "Some battles can't be won with silence and submission. Sometimes the only way to break a cycle is to shine a light so bright that everyone can see exactly what's been happening in the shadows." I lifted my head. Maybe I wasn't alone and the darkness was beginning to lift. Martha's words echoed in my mind as she quietly slipped out of the bathroom, leaving me alone with my reflection and a clarity I hadn't possessed an hour earlier. The woman staring back at me was no longer a victim. She was someone with options, with allies, and most importantly, with the intelligence to turn this disaster into something far more powerful than my family had ever imagined possible. I reached up and carefully removed Martha's silk scarf, studying my bare scalp in the harsh bathroom lighting. What had been done to humiliate me could become my greatest weapon. The wedding dress hanging in my closet had been chosen months ago during a shopping trip that had devolved into yet another battle between my preferences and my mother's vision of how a Williams bride should appear. She had pushed for something elaborate and traditional with layers of tulle and intricate beadwork that would photograph beautifully and demonstrate our family's refined taste. I had wanted something simpler, more elegant, but had eventually compromised on a gown that satisfied her need for spectacle while still feeling authentically mine. Now, looking at that dress with new eyes, I realized it was perfect for an entirely different reason. The gown was crafted from ivory silk with clean, minimalist lines that emphasized the wearer rather than overwhelming her. The neckline was modest but striking, and most importantly, it came with a cathedral-length veil made from the finest tulle that was so sheer it was almost transparent. My mother had insisted on the dramatic veil, claiming it would create stunning photographs as it trailed behind me down the aisle. She had envisioned it framing my face and hair like a cloud of ethereal beauty. Instead, it would serve as the perfect backdrop for my revelation. As I held the veil up to the window watching the morning sunlight filter through its delicate weave, I realized that attempting to hide my condition would only give my family what they wanted: my shame, my compliance, my willingness to disappear so that their reputation could remain intact. But wearing the veil in a way that showcased rather than concealed my bare scalp would transform their act of cruelty into my declaration of independence. The sheer fabric would catch the light and draw attention to what they had done, making it impossible for anyone to miss or ignore. I began experimenting with different ways to arrange the veil, discovering that when positioned properly, it created an almost ethereal effect that made my bare head look intentional and striking rather than tragic. The morning breeze drifting through my bedroom window felt different now as it moved across my scalp, not like a violation, but like freedom. There was something liberating about feeling air against skin that had been hidden beneath hair for 3 decades, as if I were experiencing the world through a completely new sense. Each tiny current of air reminded me that I was alive, that I was making choices, that I was no longer the passive recipient of my family's manipulation. But I was too strategic to rely solely on the visual impact of my appearance. Martha's mention of the doorbell camera had sparked a plan that was growing more sophisticated by the hour. I needed to approach this situation with the same careful calculation that had earned me a full academic scholarship and a successful career in marketing. Impulse and emotion had their place, but sustainable victory required planning evidence and multiple contingency strategies. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Nathan's name flashed on the screen, and for a moment I hesitated. How would I explain what had happened? Would he still want to marry me? Would he think I was being overly dramatic about a haircut, as my father had suggested? I took a deep breath and answered. Amber, Nathan's voice was warm with concern. Your mom just texted me that there's been a small issue with your hair and that I shouldn't worry. What's going on? Leave it to Eleanor to try to minimize the situation. I could imagine the carefully worded message she had crafted to make it sound like nothing more than a minor beauty mishap. They drugged me. I said the words coming out in a rush before I could second-guess myself. Last night my parents gave me tea with something in it to make me sleep, and then Jessica threatened them. She said if they didn't cut off my hair, she would leave the family forever. So they chose her. They chose to humiliate me on our wedding day, because keeping her happy was more important than protecting me. Silence followed my outburst, and for a terrible moment I thought he might not believe me. Then I heard him exhale sharply, a sound that carried both shock and a kind of controlled fury I'd rarely heard from him. Jesus Christ, he breathed, and I could almost see him processing the implications of what I had just told him. Nathan had always been analytical, the kind of man who approached problems systematically and looked for logical solutions. But this wasn't a problem that could be solved with reason or compromise. This was a deliberate act of cruelty committed by the people who were supposed to love and protect me most. I'm coming over right now. He said, his voice gaining the firm quality I had heard him use in business meetings when he needed to establish his position on non-negotiable issues. I don't care what your mother says about bad luck seeing the bride. This isn't about superstition or tradition. This is about making sure you're okay. His immediate support loosened something tight in my chest, a fear I hadn't even realized I was carrying. That he might side with my parents, might prioritize the wedding over my well-being, might try to convince me to just go along with it all for the sake of appearances. Thank you, I whispered the words inadequate for the depth of my gratitude. But I don't want to cancel the wedding. I've been thinking, and I want to go through with it, just not the way they expect. Will you help me? I'm here with you, not with an image, he replied without hesitation. I didn't fall in love with your hair, or your family's reputation, or their idea of what a proper Southern bride should look like. I fell in love with your intelligence, your kindness, your strength, and your ability to see through bullshit when everyone else is pretending everything is fine. Relief washed over me, pure, uncomplicated relief that at least one person in my life valued me for who I actually was, rather than for how I made them look. It was a validation I hadn't realized how desperately I needed until that moment. I'll be at the country club in an hour, I told him. Meet me there. Aunt Martha is going to help us access the security footage from last night, and I need you to connect with Tyler Zhang about the AV setup for the reception. The AV setup? I could hear the question in his voice, but also the immediate willingness to follow my lead. Yes, I said, feeling more confident with each word. Because when those chapel doors open and 200 guests see what my family has done, I want to make sure they hear exactly why it happened too. This isn't just going to be a wedding, Nathan. It's going to be a revelation. By the time I arrived at Magnolia Hills Country Club, Martha had already downloaded the footage from my parents' doorbell camera and was waiting for me in the bridal suite, her expression a mixture of grim satisfaction and simmering anger. "You need to hear this," she said, holding up her smartphone. "I accessed your parents' security system this morning while they were busy with their preparations. They don't know I have access, and they certainly don't know what I discovered." My heart began racing as Martha navigated to her phone's video gallery and selected a file time-stamped from the previous evening. The screen showed the familiar view from our front porch camera, the image quality surprisingly clear even in the dim lighting from the porch fixtures. For a moment, there was nothing but the peaceful suburban scene of our neighborhood at night, and then the audio began. The sound quality was slightly crackling due to the outdoor recording conditions, but every word was audible with devastating clarity. First came Jessica's voice, sharp and demanding, in a way that made my skin crawl as I heard it played back. The ultimatum was even more chilling when removed from the drugged haze that had clouded my perception the night before. Her words cut through the quiet evening air like shards of glass. "Cut her hair off or you'll lose me forever. I swear to God, Mama, if you don't do this one thing for me, I will walk out of this house tonight, and you will never see me again." My mother's response followed her voice thick with tears and the kind of desperation I had never heard from her before. "Please don't make me choose Jessica. Please don't ask me to hurt Amber like this. There has to be another way." But even as she protested, I could hear the weakness in her voice, the way she was already capitulating to my sister's demands even as she pretended to resist them. My father's voice was harder to make out initially, but then it became clear as he moved closer to the front door, apparently returning from wherever he had gone to retrieve the clippers. "We'll do it quickly," he said, his tone clinical and detached, as if he were discussing trimming hedges rather than assaulting his own daughter. "She won't remember much of it anyway with the sedative. By tomorrow it will be done, and we can all move forward." But then, underneath their familiar voices, I heard something that made my blood run cold. There was laughter in the background, distinctly male laughter that didn't belong to my father. The sound was muffled and distant, as if someone was standing further away from the recording device, but it was unmistakably there. Someone else had been present during this conversation, someone who found my family's plan amusing rather than horrifying. "Martha, who is that laughing?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, as the implications of what I was hearing began to sink in. "There's someone else there. Someone who's not family." Martha's expression darkened as she paused the recording. "I've been wondering the same thing, sweetheart. The timestamp shows this was recorded at 11:43 last night, and I know for certain that no guests were expected at the house. Your parents were very specific about wanting the evening to be family only, so you could rest before the wedding." Nathan, who had arrived just minutes after me, leaned closer to examine the phone screen, his business background making him instinctively analytical about evidence and documentation. "Can you enhance the audio somehow? Maybe isolate that background laughter so we can get a better sense of who it might be." The question sparked something in my memory, a nagging sense that I had heard that particular laugh before, though I couldn't place where or when. The sound had a quality that suggested familiarity, as if whoever was laughing was comfortable enough in our family's presence to find their cruelty entertaining rather than shocking. This wasn't a stranger who had stumbled onto a family crisis. This was someone who felt invested enough in the outcome to stick around and watch it unfold. Martha scrolled forward through the recording, and we could hear more fragments of conversation as my family moved around the porch and front yard. The unknown voice became slightly clearer at one point, though still not clear enough to identify definitively. What was unmistakable, however, was the tone of encouragement, as if this person was actively supporting what my family was planning to do to me. Without hesitation, I grabbed my own phone and began the process of transferring the audio file from Martha's device to mine. My fingers moved quickly across the screen as I created multiple backup copies and uploaded them to secure cloud storage, ensuring that this evidence couldn't be accidentally deleted or destroyed. The marketing executive in me understood the importance of controlling information, and I was determined that this recording would be preserved regardless of what my family might try to do to suppress it. "I need to get this to Tyler Zhang immediately," I said, already composing a message to the AV technician. "If we're going to use this during the reception, he needs time to review the audio quality and figure out the best way to present it to the guests." As I typed, my mind was racing through the implications of what we had discovered. This wasn't just a family dispute that had gotten out of hand. The presence of an unknown third party suggested a level of premeditation and conspiracy that elevated what had happened to me from a moment of poor judgment to something far more calculated and cruel. Someone outside our immediate family had been involved in planning my humiliation, and that someone had found it entertaining enough to stay and watch it happen. The message to Tyler was brief but urgent. Audio evidence from last night need you to review for technical quality ASAP. This changes everything. I attached the file and hit send, knowing that within hours the truth about what had really happened would be heard by 200 of the most influential people in our community. My sister's voice rang out clearly, cut her hair, and I now had the key to open the gates of hell. But that key led to a family grave deeper than I had imagined. The weight of the audio evidence was still settling in my mind when Martha suddenly straightened her expression, shifting from sympathetic support to something more urgent and investigative. "Amber, there's something else we need to check before the ceremony begins," she said, glancing at her watch with the precision of someone who had spent decades managing classroom schedules. "If we're going to present a complete picture of what happened, we need more than just audio. We need physical evidence that corroborates what we heard on that recording." Nathan immediately understood the implication of her words, his business training kicking in, as he recognized the importance of building a comprehensive case rather than relying on a single piece of evidence that could potentially be dismissed or explained away. "You're talking about documentation," he said, his voice taking on the focused tone he used when analyzing complex problems. "Medical evidence, financial records, anything that proves premeditation and planning rather than a spontaneous family crisis." Martha nodded approvingly at his grasp of the situation. "Exactly, and I happen to know that your parents are creatures of habit when it comes to disposing of evidence. Eleanor has always been meticulous about cleaning up after family incidents, but she follows predictable patterns that can work against her when someone knows what to look for." The three of us made our way quietly through the country club's service corridors, with Martha leading us toward the staff areas where she had observed the maintenance crew emptying trash from the member preparation rooms. She explained that the club's policy was to hold all refuse from special events for 24 hours before final disposal, primarily for insurance purposes in case valuable items were accidentally discarded during the chaos of wedding preparations. In a storage area behind the kitchen, we located the large rolling bins that contained the previous night's refuse from my family's house. Martha had somehow convinced the maintenance supervisor to let us examine the contents, though she was characteristically vague about what persuasion techniques she had employed. As we began systematically searching through the bags wearing latex gloves that Martha had procured from the club's first aid station, I felt like we were conducting a forensic investigation rather than preparing for a wedding. The first significant discovery came when Nathan located a small prescription bottle buried beneath coffee grounds and kitchen scraps. The label was partially stained but still legible, showing that it had contained lorazepam, a sedative medication prescribed for anxiety disorders. What made my breath catch was seeing the patient name clearly printed on the pharmacy label, Jessica Ann Williams. The prescription had been filled just 3 days earlier at Hartwell Family Pharmacy, the small local business where our family had maintained accounts for over 2 decades. "This doesn't make sense," I said, turning the bottle over in my gloved hands to examine the dosage information and refill instructions. "Why would Jessica have anxiety medication, and why would my parents be throwing away her prescription bottle?" Martha's expression grew grim as she photographed the bottle from multiple angles with her smartphone, ensuring that every detail of the label was documented clearly. "Keep looking, sweetheart. I have a feeling this is just the beginning of what we're going to find." Our search continued methodically through several more bags, until I discovered something that made my stomach lurch with recognition. Scattered throughout one particular trash bag were thick strands of dark brown hair, my hair along with smaller clippings that had been swept up from wherever the cutting had taken place. The sight of my own hair discarded like refuse was deeply disturbing, but it also provided undeniable physical evidence of what had been done to me. More importantly, wrapped carefully in a kitchen towel at the bottom of the same bag, we found the electric clippers that had been used to destroy my appearance. The device was a professional-grade model, the kind used in high-end salons rather than for casual home haircuts, suggesting that someone had specifically acquired equipment capable of creating the kind of dramatic damage I had discovered that morning. When Martha examined the clippers more closely under the storage room's fluorescent lighting, she pointed out faint but visible fingerprints on the handle and power switch. "We need to document everything exactly as we found it," Nathan said, his voice taking on the methodical tone of someone who understood the importance of maintaining evidence integrity. Photographs, measurements, anything that proves these items came from your family's house and were used last night. While we were cataloging the physical evidence, Martha's phone chimed with an incoming email notification. She glanced at the screen and her eyebrows rose with surprise before she showed us what had appeared in her inbox. It was an automated receipt from Hartwell Family Pharmacy's online payment system forwarded to her because she was listed as an emergency contact on the family's medical accounts, a detail from years earlier when she had helped care for my grandmother during her final illness. But what shocked us wasn't that Martha had received the receipt. It was whose name appeared as the purchaser of the lorazepam prescription. Instead of Jessica's name as we had expected based on the patient information on the bottle, the payment had been processed using my father's credit card and email address. Robert Williams had personally purchased the medication that had been used to drug me, despite the prescription being written for Jessica's supposed anxiety disorder. "This changes everything," Nathan said, studying the email timestamp that showed the transaction had been completed at 4:37 the previous afternoon. "This wasn't your mother acting impulsively under pressure from Jessica. Your father was actively involved in planning what happened to you, and he was purchasing the means to drug you hours before Jessica's ultimatum." The implications were staggering. The narrative I had constructed in my mind of my mother being manipulated into a terrible decision by my sister's emotional blackmail was crumbling under the weight of evidence that suggested a much more calculated conspiracy. My father, the respected deacon and community leader who prided himself on moral authority and family values, had been planning my humiliation with the same methodical attention to detail he brought to HOA board meetings and church committee work. Martha carefully forwarded the pharmacy receipt to both Nathan and me, ensuring that we would have copies, even if something happened to her phone or email account. She also took additional photographs of the prescription bottle, focusing on details that connected it to the email receipt. The prescription number, the pharmacy identification codes, and the date stamps that proved the medication had been acquired specifically for the previous night's events. As we prepared to leave the storage area, I realized that we had assembled a collection of evidence that would be impossible for my family to explain away or dismiss. The audio recording proved what had been said and by whom. The prescription bottle and receipt proved premeditation and planning. And the physical remains of my hair, along with the clippers, provided tangible proof of the assault itself. It was the kind of comprehensive documentation that could support criminal charges if I chose to pursue them, and it certainly provided more than enough evidence to destroy my family's carefully maintained reputation. Putting the pieces together, I had the complete picture of betrayal, and one missing piece was waiting to emerge from the grave of family secrets. Armed with our collection of damning evidence, we made our way back through the country club's corridors toward the bridal preparation area, where I knew the final hour before the ceremony would be filled with last-minute adjustments and the kind of nervous energy that always preceded major family events. But as we rounded the corner near the main ballroom, I found myself face-to-face with the person I least wanted to see at that moment. Jessica was waiting in the hallway dressed in her maid of honor gown and looking every inch the perfect Southern belle she had always been trained to be. She had positioned herself strategically near the entrance to the bridal suite, clearly intending to intercept me before I could retreat to the safety of my preparation room. Her appearance was flawless, as always, her golden hair arranged in an elaborate updo that had probably required 2 hours with a professional stylist, her makeup applied with the kind of precision that made her look like she was ready for a magazine photo shoot, and her sage green bridesmaid dress fitting her figure in a way that emphasized every curve. To any casual observer, she would have appeared to be the picture of sisterly support, ready to help her older sibling through the final moments before walking down the aisle. But I could see something else in her eyes, something desperate and calculating that made my skin crawl with recognition. This wasn't the confident golden child who had issued ultimatums the night before. This was someone who had spent the morning watching her carefully orchestrated plan begin to unravel, and who was now scrambling to regain control of a situation that was spiraling beyond her management capabilities. "Amber," she said, her voice taking on the artificially sweet tone she had always used when she wanted something from me. "I was hoping we could have a few minutes alone before the ceremony, you know, sister to clear the air about everything that happened last night." Nathan immediately stepped closer to me, his protective instincts clearly activated by something in Jessica's demeanor that struck him as threatening rather than conciliatory. Martha also positioned herself slightly behind Jessica, close enough to intervene if the conversation took a turn toward confrontation. I could feel their support like a physical presence, reminding me that I wasn't alone in facing whatever manipulation my sister was about to attempt. I think we've said everything that needs to be said. I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. Unless you're here to apologize for drugging me and destroying my appearance on my wedding day. Jessica's carefully constructed mask of sisterly concern slipped for just a moment, revealing something raw and ugly underneath before she managed to reassemble her expression into something resembling wounded innocence. Amber, you're being so dramatic about this. It's just hair, and it will grow back. Besides, you look fine different, but fine. The casual dismissal of what had been done to me was so perfectly in character that I almost laughed at the predictability of it. But then Jessica stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper that was clearly meant to exclude Nathan and Martha from the conversation, and her next words hit me like a physical blow. "Do you think he only loves you?" she asked, her eyes flicking toward Nathan with an expression that was impossible to misread. "I mean, really think about it, Amber. What if there are things you don't know about his feelings? What if you're not as secure in this relationship as you think you are?" The question was delivered with such practiced malice that it took my breath away. This wasn't just about hair or wedding day drama or even financial dependency on our parents. This was about something much more personal and destructive. The suggestion that my relationship with Nathan, the one thing in my life that had remained pure and untouched by my family's toxicity, might itself be built on lies or deception. I watched Jessica's face carefully as she continued her psychological assault, noting the way her eyes kept darting toward Nathan, as if she were gauging his reaction to her words. There was something hungry in her expression, something that spoke of long-held desires and carefully nursed grievances that went far beyond normal sibling rivalry. She wasn't just trying to hurt me, she was trying to plant seeds of doubt that would poison my marriage before it even began. "You know, Amber, there was a time when Nathan and I spent quite a bit of time together." She continued, her voice taking on a dreamy quality that was clearly designed to suggest romantic rather than platonic interactions. "Those coffee meetings when you were working late, the conversations we had about your relationship, the way he used to look at me when he thought no one was watching. Did you ever wonder what we talked about during those long afternoons?" The words hit their intended target with surgical precision. I did remember those coffee meetings, though I had never thought of them as anything more than my sister's attempts to get to know the man I was planning to marry. Nathan had mentioned them in passing, usually in the context of complaining about Jessica's tendency to monopolize conversations and turn every discussion back to herself. But now, filtered through my sister's poisonous insinuations, those innocent interactions took on a more sinister cast in my mind. I found myself studying Nathan's face, looking for any sign of guilt or recognition that might validate Jessica's implications. But instead of the discomfort I might have expected if there were truth to her suggestions, I saw something else entirely, a kind of disgusted recognition, as if he were finally understanding the full extent of my sister's manipulation and psychological cruelty. "He used to look at me differently," Jessica added, her voice dropping to an even more intimate whisper. "Like he was seeing something in me that he couldn't find in you. I'm not saying anything happened, of course, but there was definitely a connection there. A spark, the kind of thing that makes you wonder what might have been if circumstances had been different." The lies were so transparent, so obviously designed to create maximum emotional damage that I felt my anger crystallizing into something harder and more focused than rage. This wasn't just about destroying my wedding day or humiliating me in front of our community. This was about dismantling my entire sense of reality, making me question not just my family relationships, but the one romantic partnership that had given me hope for building a life free from their toxicity. But as I looked at Jessica's face, studying the desperate hunger in her eyes, and the way her hands were trembling slightly as she delivered her carefully rehearsed poison, I realized that she had revealed more about herself than she intended. This wasn't the confident manipulation of someone who held power. This was the flailing attack of someone who had lost control and was trying to inflict as much damage as possible before being completely exposed. "Today isn't your day," I responded coldly, and her eyes flashed with anger, hiding an old wound. Jessica's flash of anger confirmed what I had suspected. Beneath her carefully constructed manipulations lay a wound that ran much deeper than simple sibling rivalry. But I didn't have time to analyze the psychological complexities of my sister's motivations. The ceremony was scheduled to begin in less than 2 hours, and I needed to ensure that my carefully planned revelation would proceed without interference from my family's damage control efforts. With Nathan and Martha flanking me like protective sentries, I made my way toward the chapel, where Pastor Wilson was conducting his final preparations for the ceremony. I had known Pastor Wilson since childhood, And while he had always been respectful of my family's prominent position in the congregation, I had also observed that he possessed genuine moral convictions that sometimes put him at odds with the social politics of our community. If anyone could be trusted to prioritize truth over reputation, it would be the man who had spent 30 years preaching about Christian principles to a congregation that didn't always want to hear them. I found him in the small preparation room behind the altar, reviewing his ceremony notes and adjusting his clerical robes with the methodical precision of someone who had officiated hundreds of weddings over the course of his pastoral career. When he looked up and saw my appearance, his expression shifted through the same sequence of shock and concern that I had witnessed in everyone else who had encountered me that morning. But unlike my family members, Pastor Wilson didn't immediately launch into explanations or damage control strategies. Instead, he simply waited for me to speak his patient silence, offering me the opportunity to tell my story in my own way. "Pastor Wilson," I began, my voice steadier than I had expected it to be. "I need to ask something important of you today. I need you to perform the ceremony exactly as we planned, without any changes or interruptions, regardless of what you might hear about what happened to me last night. The wedding itself is sacred to Nathan and me, and I don't want the actions of my family to contaminate that part of our day." He nodded slowly, his weathered face reflecting decades of experience with family crises and moral dilemmas. "Amber, I can see that something terrible has happened to you, and I want you to know that whatever support you need from me, you have it. But I also need you to understand that if there are criminal matters involved, I have certain obligations as both a pastor and a community leader." The weight of his words settled around us like a blanket of moral gravity. Pastor Wilson wasn't just offering me spiritual comfort, he was acknowledging that what had been done to me might require intervention from authorities beyond our church community. The validation was both reassuring and sobering, reminding me that I was dealing with something far more serious than a family disagreement. "I understand your obligations," I replied, "and I'm not asking you to ignore them. But I am asking you to let me handle this situation in my own way, at my own pace. Don't disrupt the ceremony, just let truth speak at the reception. Sometimes the most powerful justice comes not from legal intervention, but from community accountability and the natural consequences of people's actions being exposed to the light." Pastor Wilson studied my face with the kind of intense attention he usually reserved for difficult theological questions, as if he were trying to read the condition of my soul through my physical appearance. After a long moment, he reached out and gently touched my hand, his gesture carrying all the pastoral care and spiritual authority that had made him a trusted leader in our community for 3 decades. "Amber, I've watched your family for many years, and I've always sensed that there were currents running beneath the surface of your picture-perfect image," he said quietly. "If you're telling me that those currents have finally broken through in a way that has caused you real harm, then I believe you and I will support whatever approach you think will best serve justice and healing." His words gave me the confidence I needed to proceed with the next phase of my preparation. I made my way to the reception area where Tyler Zhang was setting up the audio-visual equipment for the evening's festivities. He was exactly as Martha had described him, a serious young man with an obvious dedication to technical precision and a quiet intensity that suggested strong moral convictions. When I approached him with my request to review the audio evidence and prepare it for potential presentation during the reception, he listened with the kind of focused attention that told me he understood the gravity of what I was asking. "Miss Amber, I want you to know that your mother did speak to me earlier this morning." Tyler said, his voice carrying a note of apology that made my heart sink. "She asked me to be prepared to cut the audio system if there were any technical difficulties during the reception. She said the family was concerned about potential disruptions from guests who might have had too much to drink." The news hit me like a physical blow. My mother had anticipated that I might try to use the reception as a platform for revealing the truth, and she had already taken steps to prevent me from having access to the very technology I needed to share the evidence with our guests. For a moment, I felt the familiar sensation of being outmaneuvered by my family's superior experience with manipulation and control. But Tyler's next words restored my hope. "However," he continued, "I've listened to the audio file you sent me, and I've reviewed the documentation your aunt provided. What was done to you is morally reprehensible, and I won't be part of helping your family cover it up. I have backup systems and alternative presentation methods that your mother doesn't know about. When you're ready to share the truth, I'll make sure everyone hears it clearly." The relief I felt was overwhelming. Despite my mother's attempts at sabotage, I still had allies who were willing to prioritize truth over social convenience. Tyler's technical expertise combined with his moral conviction gave me confidence that my evidence would reach its intended audience regardless of my family's interference attempts. Martha appeared at my side as if summoned by intuition, her presence adding another layer of support to my growing network of allies. "Amber, I want you to know that whatever happens today, you won't face it alone," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent decades standing up to bullies and manipulators in various forms. "If you need someone to testify about what they've witnessed, if you need someone to corroborate your story, if you need someone to stand with you when the consequences begin, I'll be there. I've been watching this family's toxic patterns for too long to stay silent any longer." The commitment in her voice was absolute, and I realized that Martha wasn't just offering me support for this single confrontation. She was offering to help me break free from the cycle of abuse and manipulation that had defined my entire relationship with my family. With her backing combined with the technical support from Tyler and the unwavering love from Nathan, I had assembled a coalition of people who were committed to ensuring that truth would prevail over image justice, over reputation, and healing over the perpetuation of generational trauma. Pastor Wilson appeared beside us, having finished his final preparations for the ceremony. His presence completed the circle of support that I needed to move forward with confidence. "Amber," he said, his voice carrying both pastoral gentleness and prophetic strength. "I've been thinking about what you said, and I want you to know that sometimes God uses the most painful experiences to expose the darkness that has been hiding in families and communities for generations." Pastor whispered, "Justice isn't loud, but it's clear, and today it will echo, breaking even the ghosts from the past."